Welcome to Defying the Odds podcast, the podcast where grit, resilience, and drive take center stage. I am Leonovsky, political refugee from the Soviet Union, and now professor of entrepreneurship.
I'm Victor Salcida, a formerly incarcerated individual turned software engineer and social entrepreneur on a mission to empower justice-impacted individuals through technology, education, and systemic change.
In 2018, I was fortunate to have Victor as one of my students while he was incarcerated. Fast forward, we're both free to find opportunities, challenge stereotypes as business partners, community leaders, and co-anchors of this life-changing podcast, where we dive deep into powerful conversations with guests who have shattered their own barriers and defied their own odds.
On each episode, we're here to bring you not just stories, but strategies, real tools to help you take on challenges in life, business, and beyond.
So tune in, be inspired, and get ready to defy your own odds.
This is Defying the Odds podcast, where no challenge is too great to conquer.
Let's go. All right. What's up, Victor?
Hey, Leo. Happy 2025.
Happy New Year, my friend. It is a powerful year, 2025. Quarter of a century has passed, right? And it's been, 7 years? 7 years since I've known you. How about that?
5 years since I've been out.
Woo! What a ride. All right, well, listen, Victor, how have you defied the odds since the last time we talked?
Oh, man. Well, I know we had our recent trip up to Washington, and I was hoping to get inside the prison facility through a couple avenues, but it just kept getting blocked somehow, and didn't know if I was going to make it, and just kind of like accepted it. I think I was on my last day in Washington after spending 3 weeks up there trying to get into the prison. And I got a phone call Friday morning, just saying like, hey, the superintendent's approving you to come in with like very short notice, like pretty much drop your things and go. But I just like, I got to go in and see the guys. So I definitely had an awesome time with them. It was an amazing experience. I went back to the New Freedom program, which was the same program that I helped start, and graduated the first cohort. So it was cool for them to kind of just hear my story and just show them, what is possible after release. But yeah, I had to defy the odds in order to get to tell them that story. So that's my story starting off 2025. How about you, Leo?
For me, I think mine is a little bit more personal. I think the last week, I was my wife had to go on a business trip, and I'm on my own as with 2 kids and 3 dogs and 2 tarantulas and God knows what else I have to take care of. And so it's been fascinating to be able to, challenging to be able to get everything and put everybody together. And one of the things that I kind of take away from it, besides the general appreciation of how hard it is to manage kids in general, is and my own schedule, is the fact that there is so much joy and there's so much learning and so much joy that's hidden inside everyday challenges, that it's so easy to kind of get wrapped up for me into what needs to be done and miss the joy, miss the beauty. And several times this week, I've been kind of reminded of what a precious time I have with my kids. There's just not that much. And so that was be one. I will be remiss if I don't mention another one, also family related, but having to do with you. You were here for 3 weeks, but it was almost impossible for us to get together between holidays and everything else. And having you come to my house and check out my things, and for me to meet your new son and to play with your daughter, to talk to your partner, it's been such a huge joy, and to kind of see full circle. So sometimes defying the odds is not a big thing. Sometimes it's just keep going and trying to find the things that matter.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, it's always good seeing you, Leo.
Well, today, for those of you who are watching or listening, today we have a really special guest and someone who has definitely made an indelible mark on my life and my career. Is Dan Pacholke, who's a former Secretary of Department of Corrections for Washington State, among other things. And I've met Dan probably about 10 years ago, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when he was doing a TEDx inside Monroe Correctional Complex. I think it was 2013. And ever since then, we've kept in touch. The vision for the prisons and the transformation that he himself has had a profound impact on me and how I see the prison system and the future of our society as we move along and transition from this kind of punitive to one that focuses more on rehabilitation. So I'm super excited to talk to him about that. So let's welcome Dan. Hey, Dan, welcome to the stage.
Hi, thank you very much. It's good. It's good to see both you, Leo and Victor.
Oh man, it's such a cool thing. Yeah, I remember the first time we met. You were speaking at Monroe Correctional Complex. I remember we had organized this TEDx, and there were 6 speakers from the prison side, from those who were incarcerated, and 6 speakers from kind of policy side, from the administrative side. And it was the first TEDx that I've ever attended. So I had to go to prison to attend the TEDx. But the reason why I was there is because I was their speech coach. I was the speech coach for those who were incarcerated. They heard that I was a communication coach, and so they said, "Hey, why don't you help us out?" And I have to say, our guys did good.
I was there around that time. I just wasn't a speaker.
Yeah, you were not a speaker at the time, but man, you could have totally done it. But the one of the things that I remember very clearly when you were speaking is that how you were the first administrator that I've ever met inside the prison system who has been genuinely open and upfront about transformation, about changing of thinking. And I was really, really impressed by that. So we'll talk more about that and more. But first, I want to ask you a question. Just think about, how would you defying the odds? When you hear somebody is defying the odds, or in your experience, what does that mean to you?
You know, in some ways, I think for myself and maybe for others too, it is it's curiosity, that they have a sincere interest, and in a positive way, and it's continuing to come back to that interest on, how do we make something run better? How do we fix something? How do we prevent something? But you have enough curiosity and interest where you stay in that game of work or study or whatever it is that you're working on at the time. But oftentimes I think it's those people that have that interest that do really well. Certainly in the corrections field, there are people that I've known that within the first 2 years turned pretty negative. And 30 years later, when I was retiring as the head of the agency, they were leaving as correctional officers and they were still negative. So, I mean, how do you want to spend your life? And so I would say for myself, anyhow, it was curiosity, it was interest, it was something that gave me energy, something that gave me a little bit of a thrill, something you had to keep coming back to and asking new questions just over and over again.
I love that. So curiosity and interest. You have to be curious in what you're going to be diving into. Can you give us a better example of what that may look like?
Well, it's a long time ago when I was like a young captain at Clallam Bay Correction Center, a pretty volatile facility at the time, pretty disturbance prone and stuff. I remember meeting with the education director and a woman that was in charge of staff training, and we had been training staff on verbal de-escalation skills. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. And then he goes, well, we'd really like to offer it as a course, in our education program up on the education floor. And my initial reaction was, whoa, wait a minute. You're going to offer the same, kind of coursework to staff that you're offering to the incarcerated population. And eventually we agreed to it, and we thought, all right, let's make a run at this. And I remember being out talking to some staff, and they're saying, "Hey, I don't know about this. They're just going to manipulate us. They're just going to manipulate us, this and that and the other thing." And I thought to myself, well, I mean, if you're getting compliance, I said, does that really matter? Right? I mean, does it matter how you're achieving compliance? So there's like a small example of just having a curiosity around doing something different. Oftentimes, certainly in corrections, it's going to go against the flow. It's going to go against what was traditional if you're going to make a breakthrough of some sort in how you approach, prison construction or policies or something like a TEDx event, or even how you train people is it'll go against the flow, which creates some tension around those issues. But I think without tension, there's not change. And I certainly think in this field,
Mhm.
change is necessary, and in many cases, rapid change.
Right.
Wow. Without conflict, right? Did you say there is no change?
I think for the most part, without conflict, there's not change. And for myself, I suppose my own part of my own defying the odds story was I like change, and I like to push for change, and not really recognizing for a number of years that a lot of people are uncomfortable with it. That they'd much rather default back to, especially in a time of crisis, people want to default back to, hey, we used to do it like this. Hey, 15 years ago we did that, and not recognizing that we know more about this work and more about what's effective now than we've ever known. And so I was never a person that wanted to rest on what we used to do. I felt like I was the person that was looking to make a difference, and oftentimes that requires change, and there's tension around it.
Love it.
And yeah, you mentioned tension. Can you talk about what like in your tenure as the department secretary, like how you've tried to change the system? Because I think for those listeners who are not kind of in that policy field and whatnot, one of the I just want to make a connection here. The common connection is like every one of us works in institutions that might be resistant to change, and the Department of Corrections is, in my experience, has been one of the most resistant to change organizations I've experienced myself. And yet you came in and you've done some really uh, powerful things, some major changes. I think that your lessons in how you did that can be incredibly valuable to others.
Well, I think for me, what I always wanted was kind of a productive day. I wanted staff to feel like they're doing something that's rewarding, that they feel comfortable going home and telling their kids about. And it's the same thing with the people that were, serving their time there. Is when they're talking to their family on the phone, or they're visiting someone, that they have a story about what they're doing and how they're moving through this period of incarceration and how that's going to be beneficial. So I'll give you a couple examples on some one-off things. It's like, as an example, when in 2003 or whatever, I'm at Cedar Creek, this small kind of forest camp, and I met Nalini Nadkarni, who was the rainforest researcher, and together we decided that we would raise endangered species in prisons: Taylor checker spot butterfly, the Oregon spotted frog, and 50 different varieties of rare and indigenous prairie plants, right? And so the whole thinking there was that if we did these projects, that it would provide a service to the community. The community is going to benefit by having these endangered species raised. The the incarcerated population that was working with those endangered species had the benefit of having biologists, scientists come in that were curious about their notes and observations and what they saw and how they treated these different types of species. So in a sense, they became collaborators, right? It was no longer a hierarchical relationship. I'm the boss, you're doing the work I want you to do. As they felt it as being much more collaborative. What it also did at the same time, and I don't know that I realized all this at the time, is it brought in those very scientists and researchers and biologists and people from fish and wildlife and other departments. So it made the prison environment more permeable. And people that
Mm.
know me know that I say this a lot is the public should see what goes on. They should have the ability to witness what's occurring in there. And I always think those two things are powerful. And so anyhow, so we started doing these frogs and butterflies, and it's just about weird enough to where a lot of my colleagues and peers are going, what the hell, man? I mean, what are you doing here? And I thought to myself, prison is kind of routine, and there's certain things that happen, and there's certain conversations that happen in there all the time. As soon as we started doing organic gardening and we started raising these endangered species, then the next thing you know, the conversations that I was having with people while I was walking and touring the prison changed. I mean, it just changed completely. And we went on and we did other stuff too. It's like another really kind of interesting one was that in Cedar Creek Corrections Center, 2,000 bed facility. That was the first male facility we put dogs in as far as doing dog retraining, like cell dogs essentially. And the pushback I got on the dogs was incredible. To the point where I almost had to fire an associate superintendent. Kept blocking me, and finally had to make it really clear I wasn't, asking for her permission. I was telling her she needs to get it done. And so there's lots of controversy around doing that. And of course, we got the animals inside, tremendously successful, huge adoption rate. About half the animals would be adopted by staff. But the point there being is, the handlers saw that their own lives and the stories of the dogs, it was productive. Families were adopting them. It reduces violence in prisons. It makes people smile. I mean, it does weird things. I've seen men inside prison around dogs do things that you wouldn't see them do without those animals. So sometimes I think it takes a curveball of some sort, not unlike the endangered species or the dogs, or even TEDx events, which also had its controversy. Oh, you want to bring in the governor's staff, and you want to bring in ranking department administrators, and you want to sit them side by side with the incarcerated and their family, and you want them all to talk and participate in the same event at the same time. Controversy, right? I mean, it was unusual. However, for everybody that was there to this very day, they mention it just like you did, Leo. I mean, especially for some of the staff out of the governor's office, they had no idea that the story I told and the stories that the incarcerated told were basically the same. I mean, we were all on about the same agenda. I mean, if you watched all the videos today, you would see we're traveling in the same path. We had mutual interest, and none of that was set up. It just happened that way, you know. So there's a couple little examples, I guess.
Yeah, I love I guess the humanity.
Victor, what do you think?
Yeah, the humanity behind it, on how you're still just caring for people and wanting people to kind of value relationships, even if it's with like dogs. I'm very familiar with the dog program. They had one at the Twin Rivers unit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, seeing the impact that it had on their lives, and just a really amazing program, especially in such a challenging time at people's lives. But yeah, really grateful. And I think one of the other experiences that I had was a job I never thought I'd have in prison was working at the worm farm at WSR at the Washington State Reformatory. I was playing with worms for about 6 months or something. I forget how much they're paying me, 42 cents an hour or something like that. But yeah, it was also really fun to kind of just like do something different. We had a garden that we're using some of the worm poop with, and yeah, it was a pretty cool experience, and just kind of made me appreciate like gardening and just like all of that stuff a lot more for sure.
I'm happy that you use the word um, humanity when you describe that, Victor, because I do think that is part of what they do is they bring in a humanness, right? They bring in an orientation towards care around certain things. And I didn't do all these things, but I participated in all of them. But whether it's the family council that comes in, from time to time to have discussions with prison administrators, or whether it's the extended family visiting program, which oftentimes is used by parents and grandparents much more so even than husbands and wives and their children, is each and every one of these things, in my experience, introduces a humanness. I mean, an extended family visiting, if your grandmother or mother came to visit you, if she wanted to, she could sit on the couch with you watching TV and hold your hand all day long, because there was no one there to say anything about that, right? I mean, it was a time to have a little bit of private time with your loved ones, which I think was extremely powerful. But when you go after that humanness and you go after the humanity side of it, what inevitably you get time and time again is you get improvements in outcomes, certainly in prison misconduct and prison behavior and orientation towards completing programs and connection to family, which is a huge point in transition. So um, yeah, I would like to think many of those things were intended to inject humanity in a system that can be anything other than humane if you're not paying attention to it.
Yeah, and I just want to mention for those who are not aware, these programs, the one that you mentioned, the dog program, there is one in Monroe Correctional Complex called the Summit Assistance Dogs. That is the oldest service dog training program, and I personally have had a chance to meet several of the dogs and meet several of the handlers, and it changes lives. It changes lives of those people, but it does bring the humaneness to it. And the other piece that I wanted to mention is that the programs you mentioned, some of them are no longer there because post-COVID, things have just, I mean, it was such a hard thing for everybody. For every one of you who are listening and you've had your COVID story, I'm certain, I just want you to just imagine the challenges that those who are incarcerated and those who had to manage the prisons had to deal with. It was actually a huge challenge. But this idea of continuing focusing on bringing in humanity in, and the fact that counter to what you said, the pushback, right? Counter to the common belief, this does not decrease effectiveness; it increases effectiveness. So, like when you're thinking about business, when you're thinking about your company and increasing the humaneness of whatever culture that you are building, the benefits outweigh the costs every time and
No,
time again. So
they
I just think it is a powerful thing to consider.
yeah, we had about a 10-year track record
Um,
in between like '06 and when I left in 2016 of decreasing violence in the system at the aggregate, which means on the global scale, year after year. And you got to remember at that time, it was much more crowded than it is today. So that was always, part of the challenge is how do you interject humaneness in order to just make the system more productive. And it's really easy to revert to baseline, to go back to what was. I mean, it's just easier for people. I was moving in and out of prisons around the country during COVID. Um, Even many of the organizations I was working for wouldn't allow um, experts to come in, but I was able to go in and move around these different prisons around the country. And as you have kind of stated, I mean, they were horrible. Post COVID, some places, I don't know about Washington because I haven't spent a lot of time there. I describe it as like a COVID hangover. Is in some cases they've gotten used to not doing some things that they used to do, and it's just easier for them, for staff, I suppose. And so some of the things that have been very effective haven't been fired back up because it's another thing to do they see in their mind. What they don't see it as is a solution to a set of problems they're facing today. Right. So I think that's the difference sometimes. You think, wow, if we got to do that, that's another thing on my plate, and not seeing it. If you do this, then you don't have to do these, kind of these other things. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we appreciate that, Dan. And for the next question, I'm sure listeners are curious, especially from your perspective. And going into 2025, how do we, or how would you just like consider defying the odds in our current state of our justice system? What would be the areas of focus?
I think part of it is to continuing to educate as much as you can, and that can be done through the media, That can be done through podcasts, as you're demonstrating today. I think a lot of it is bringing in outside eyes. And of course, in my current work, a lot of it is highlighted through litigation, and just challenging what are human rights violations that the average person that has never spent any time in prison could not, they honestly, I don't think could believe what goes on if they really knew it, right? So I do think it is continuing to push on that, down that road, and continuing to push on things that we know are effective in assisting people in transition back to the community, and maintaining family connections, and maintaining humane environments, in finding ways to make sure there's parsimony in what we do. And because someone had a low-level rule violation doesn't necessarily mean, we need to lock them up and take away every privilege they ever had, because it's going to be detrimental to our own interest. So it's a continued push, and it feels like we're starting out from a point of being behind. And I think COVID did set systems kind of back in some ways to what they used to be, and not in a positive way.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background? What happened since your tenure with Department of Corrections? What was your transformation like? And what is it that you're doing now to help defy the odds?
Well, I was 33 years, 4 months in Washington State Department of Corrections.
Wow.
Started started as an officer, worked my way up, and superintendent of 3 different prisons, and director of prison system and head of the agency. When I retired, I went to work for New York University, and they had an arm that was working on innovative practice in prison and jail and parole and probation. So I spent about 1.5 years or so with them, and I left and went to serve as I guess for lack of a better term, an expert in corrections, supporting prisoner litigation. So probably done 55 plus different cases around the country. Some of them are multi-year cases, some of them are much shorter, but trying to highlight some inhumane practices, some civil rights violations, things that are akin to torture, I want to say system-wide. So the reason that has been important for me is I can say I viewed it as a practitioner, I viewed it as an academic. Now I view it more so from the perspective of the experience that people in prisons feel about these different things. And looking at those 3 different angles will give you 3 very different perspectives. And that is also what brings me to, kind of back to what we were talking about originally, about change, and about needing the ability to push for change, and having urgency around the issue, having urgency around it. I mean, too many times I hear about strategic plans, and what that means is we won't do it today, and we'll plan a bunch of stuff, and we will try and get money, and then maybe we'll do it tomorrow. Where at least when I was coming up, is we did more incremental change. If we knew there was a problem, we tried to fix 3 or 4 things immediately. And once we got those in place, we saw how well it worked, and then maybe we'd change 3 or 4 more things, and we continued down that path. So I think it's kind of the difference between, if you're planning an IT project, between using agile development techniques versus like waterfall. I'm much more of the agile guy. I mean, I like to go in there, and if we're doing some horrible things, let's change it now. Let's just stop it, and then we'll move on, and we'll make other incremental adjustments. I think too often people are saying, oh, it's cultural change, it's difficult and slow. In my own estimation, that's an excuse for you don't have the ability to stand up to people and say, let's get this done.
Yeah, so I think what advice, I guess, would you give to our listeners who are maybe facing similar challenges? We hear, just like this need for, curiosity, need for interest, and now this need for urgency. Is there anything else that you think our listeners should kind of be aware of, or just, anything around mindsets or anything like that?
Well, I mean, one, it's difficult work to do, and I think you do have to speak at it from the perspective of what can work and what can be effective. And too many people want to rest too long and hard on evidence-based practice. A ton of what we do in corrections or criminal justice has no evidence around it at all. But focus on humaneness and humanity and productive operations. It won't be easy. I mean, you will be faced with those very comments about long-term change and strategic change and the kind of stories that people tell themselves in order to put it off, for another day. I think the media is powerful. I think the media is very powerful if you can get media coverage around these different issues. If you can get inside the prison to where you can have a firsthand look at it, people like Leo that came in and outside of Monroe for all that period of time, you have influence over the staff as you develop relationships with them, and they may see other possibilities. I think, so getting people inside, I think using the media, I think litigation has its point. And sometimes people forget that there's such a thing as good litigation. If you have a really bad practice and you're confronted with litigation, maybe that just gives you, the opportunity or the reason to go out and impact that change. When I was coming up in Washington, certainly by the time I was superintendent and above, our main goal when we got litigated was to try to find a way to fix it before we ever got to court, and try and find a way to fix it to where the people that were litigating us were satisfied with the fixes that we were putting in place. Effectively, we wanted to have a good rapport with the folks that were incarcerated and the folks that represent them. It won't be easy, though. I mean, people get distracted so easy, and adult malprison doesn't necessarily get everybody motivated to be there. But some of the most passionate people I've seen have been civil rights attorneys by far, that really will stand up and be accounted for these violations that they see going on inside. I mean, that's a lot of things to say in one answer.
No, but it's a great one. I just want to summarize some of the things you're mentioning, because I think it is so critical, and make it relevant for our listeners. Because some people are like, well, what does it have to do with my life? What does it have to do with my idea? If you think about any organization that one works in, there is what we call like the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, right? And I think what you are sharing with us again and again is examples of a growth mindset. It's this idea of having curiosity. It's the embrace of the fact that if you want change, there will be conflict and controversy. You cannot run from that. In fact, you need to go into that knowing that it's not going to be easy, but it's worth it, right? And then what you're bringing into the discussion that we haven't had as so much in our discussion is this idea of bringing in humaneness into any kind of, injecting humaneness into any kind of project process, and injecting incrementality, this agile thinking of the idea of not saying like, yes, it's a big problem, we can't deal with it, but more like, here's the one thing we can do. Here's another thing. I love that fact that there's a mindset you've mentioned about finding ways to fix the things that you are being litigated against, rather than fighting the litigation, which is right. And this idea of like any kind of input is good input so that you can move forward. This idea is so foreign right now that I see in many organizations. It doesn't have to be prison. And the idea is those people, what I call high impact people like you, people like Victor, people who are willing to defy the status quo and defy the odds, they use these tools, right? So these are common to any organization. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is really critical here is eyewitness accounts. You talked about it, media, but eyewitness is critical. And I just want to share a quick story for me. You mentioned me going into prison for this long. This idea is like with Defy Ventures, the organization that I brought into Washington State and where Victor graduated from. One of the key elements, the secret sauce of the program, it's a 10-month-long program that teaches entrepreneurship, employment, and personal empowerment. It's bringing in the people, bringing in the mentors. Twice during or three times during the program, we bring in the mentors. And the impact that it has on those who are incarcerated, our entrepreneurs in training, Victor can talk about it, is profound. But even more profound is the impact it has on those that we bring in as eyewitnesses. And they leave completely changed. We have our next event coming up on March 12th. So this is another opportunity to experience it for those. And it is powerful. It is powerful. So I just wanted to connect with that. Victor, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that stands out to me as well from what he was saying is just leaving with a good rapport. I think that's important, the relationships, and when we relate that to business, we obviously want to think about the people that we are serving and just trying to come to common grounds. And at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we are just thinking about it from a human-centered design. That's what term I like to use, is just because at the end of the day, each of these individuals are human. They should be, treated as such. And just love that that Dan, had that mindset, while being able to serve us. So just really appreciate it, and all of the outcomes that came as a result.
Yeah.
It's so hard to know what the change. I mean, it's so hard to know what is the small change that will make the difference. I mean, is it a veterans unit? Is it a dog unit, a dog program unit? I had this, my secretary at Stafford could tell you the story, and I don't want to tell too many stories about myself, but I'll tell you about this one anyhow. But I was superintendent at Stafford Creek, and it was a very nice prison in the sense it was somewhat popular. Let's put it like that. Is there's plenty of places people didn't want to go. They didn't mind going to Stafford Creek. And one day I'm sitting in my office, and my secretary comes in, and she goes, "Hey, there's a lady that's just bawling her eyes out in public access." Well, okay, bring her in here. She said, "Well, I don't know. It may be someone here to visit one of the incarcerated." I said, "I don't care. Bring her in here." Because I wasn't doing much at the time anyways. And here's this man's mom, right? And so she comes in and tells me this story about, driving a couple hours and spending money, and was here to visit her son. And her son got in some form of trouble and was in segregation for some reason. And she understood it, blah, blah, blah. And, it's his fault and all this other stuff. And I said, "Look, ma'am," I said, "I can do something about this." "Oh, no, he did, this, that, and the other." I said, "No. Listen, I'm going to take care of this. Okay. I can't do it all the time, but I'm going to do it for you right now." And so we did. Now, come to find out, and I didn't know this at the time, juvenile lifer, he inevitably got commutation and was on the outside. He wrote a specific program, and he said what changed him from being a problem inside that prison to being a person that was really productive, that inevitably got out because he got pardoned, was he said it to me anyhow, because I was nice to his mom. His mom had done nothing wrong. And I guess I tell you that because that is why visiting is so important. That's why tablets are important. That's why phone calling is important. That's why a decent visit room or a Christmas event is important. Is the last thing that anybody wants is for you to disrespect their family, much less disrespect them. But it's a combination of these things that hits different people at different points along the way. I mean, maybe for some person it's one thing, and for another person it was just one event that he saw as being extremely impactful. I think he's a lawyer today, but he saw as being very impactful at the time. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I think I want to. Do you remember his name?
I do, but I'm not going to say it.
Okay, good. Well, maybe I can reach out sometime. Maybe we can bring him on, because I think that would give a color to the story. But I think this idea of respect is really critical. It's really, really critical. When people tell me what was the most important thing about my program, the program that I brought in, the Defy Ventures program, it comment time and time again, it was, it's like there's so much information there, so much value. But what they really talking about is they say, "You make me feel human. I feel human here. I feel respected here." And it changes the way. And so when you think about business and creating a community and culture of business, wherever you are, creating this culture of respect, mutual respect, and that goes above and beyond the rules and regulations, because so many people hide behind the rules and regulations, right? We used to to have, for example, with Defy Ventures, we used to have in most states, in fact, they allow families to come to the graduation. So they see their sons and their daughters in caps and gowns going through something maybe for the first time ever. And in Victor's cohort was the first and the last that they let in families, and I had to really defy the odds to make that happen. It was one of those, they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. And this idea of like, hey, let's change the way we think about the work we do. From that is do we have respect? Do we have humaneness in what we bring in these things? And what you did, Victor happens to know the person you were talking about, and I happen to know him too. That one change, the thing that you did, changed lives of not just that one individual, but so many others. That man has transformed the system. He is changed. And so that's the last thing that I wanted to mention before I ask you my final question is this: do not underestimate little things. You say it's hard to know what would make a difference.
Right.
Yes. So keep making these changes. Like, you just don't know which one, but every time when I think about the things that made the most difference, they're typically the tiniest little things, right? But it's not the thing, it's the mindset, right? It's going back to that mindset. So last question for you, where you are now, what is your current cutting edge? Where are you currently trying to defy the odds? Like, can you tell us about some of the challenges or things that you're working on, perhaps promote some of the work you're doing so others can look it up and share how they can find you and what you're doing?
Well, I certainly go into some pretty dark places and see very inhumane practices. I mean, I haven't been inside Washington for a while, but I was shocked at what I saw outside Washington. I mean, I thought I kind of understood this business until I got out and around more in other states, and I was just really shocked at how bad it can be. And I certainly look at my work through a very different lens now that I've done so much of it from the perspective of the incarcerated. I'll give you one example, and my wife and I have talked about this repetitively, is what if we had, like an online grievance system where people could file grievances electronically. And let's just say that we had some AI components to it where you could tell that it's not necessarily one issue in their grievance. It may be three. It may be a primary, a secondary, and something else. And you're able to detect patterns around, time of day of the week, department, food service, medical, dental. Or you're just say, hey, I've got this one incarcerated person that has filed like 60 of these things and files nonstop. Um, that it's an indicator system that is extremely powerful. I tell people, some people I know that are still doing the work inside the department, and I said, look, if let's just say I see a problem in one of your IMU units or your mental health units, and let's just say there's 6 guys that I think this problem applies to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, instead of looking at it from a chain of command perspective in a vertical sense, is I'm going to pull their grievances, perhaps their request to staff member or kites. I might pull their disciplinary record. I might pull use of force. I might pull mental health notes. And I'll look at a cross section of documents that apply to these given individuals. And oftentimes what you'll see is patterns will emerge that, someone may have an underlying mental health issue, gets caught up in disciplinary. Next thing you know, there's some retaliation going on. They're filing grievances about it. And you could have a grievance that's almost life threatening that someone could reject and say, oh yeah, you're outside timeframes. And it's like, how is that you could have, someone alleging misconduct that is extremely egregious, maybe even life threatening, but the only thing the grievance coordinator's got to do is say, oh well, you're outside timeframes, and then the issue's dead, right? So I think there needs something that is more automated in the sense that no staff have to handle it, that you can do it online. It probably needs some AI components to it to help analyze and get at the real issues underneath that. And then, are you tracking it? I mean, are you tracking the different departments and, food service, medical, property, individual staff members? I mean, do you know? I mean, how many times did they file a grievance on Leo Novinsky, or whoever that officer might be, or that sergeant or that counselor? I think there's much more that can be done With the grievance system, that would be preventative for the systems or the facilities. But there seems like there's a lot of effort put in place to find ways to reject grievances, to not have it be a transparent process, or to say, hey, someone's grieved too many times, therefore, we're going to say you can't use the grievance system. So
Wow,
rather than
this is so fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
rather than seeing it as something that's beneficial. The other thing I tell people all the time is the same thing I've told the both of you here is, um, I like the idea of family councils. I know it's challenging to manage, but I like the idea of it to get families engaged because oftentimes it's productive. I like the idea of engaging every faith component that you can imagine, whether it's Native American or Muslim or Pacific Islanders or whatever the case may be, because oftentimes people will find themselves in that stuff. I am increasingly impatient with people telling me, hey, this is difficult and slow and by God, it's cultural change. To me, that's just a bunch of excuses not to get it done, especially when when the practices are that horrendous.
Yeah. Victor, this is up your alley. This sounds to me like something that Victory Code can actually focus on.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, if they needed anybody, we could definitely build out like a pilot program or something in Washington and see how it goes.
I'd love to see you do it, and I do think it's extremely necessary on many levels, just to have the ability to hear people via grievance system, and especially those that are in deep in mental health units, deep in segregation units, those types of places.
Yeah, well, now a lot of the institutions, they'll have the tablets, and I'm sure it'd probably be a lot easier to set up some type of automated system on those tablets.
There's no reason you can't do it. There's no reason whatsoever it can't be done.
That's awesome. Well, when we do it, when we start to defy the odds that way, we're going to have you as one of the advisors for sure.
You let me
Um,
know.
yeah, no, it's an amazing idea, and I also just want to generalize it in that the idea of having a grievance system that is outside of the chain of command is threatening to the powers that be. Right? They try to cover things up, but if it's done right, it could be used not just in the prison system. It could be used in the medical field. It could be used in corporate world. It could be used. We can identify and flush out these huge problems that can be swept under the rug until it's too late. And I think that it is critical, and that is the way how technology can actually assist in humaneness. Right, going back to that idea.
Oh,
Well,
there's no
yeah.
question. I mean, any of the major companies that are rolling out tablets could do this today if their client base wanted it. Have an automated online grievance system where everything is tracked, time frames, whether or not people are responding on time, the many levels of response. It could all be done.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. Victor, you want to take us out?
Yeah, we could close it up. Really appreciate you, Dan, for jumping in and giving us our listeners something to listen to. Yeah, looking forward to future conversations and looking to defy the odds in 2025. We do want to highlight, just the importance of humanity and connection with just the actual person that you're serving or having communication with. Could go a long ways in business or beyond, so just, value the relationships and the people that you do have around you, let them know. One thing that I did love about Dan, the first time I met him was, his approachability, just being able to say, hi and shake his hand was a big thing. So yeah, just really appreciate all of the work that you did over the years, the impact that you had on so many people's lives. And the impact that you continue to have. So yeah, wishing you the best in 2025.
Hey, thank you both for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun. Victor, you've done amazing stuff. Leo, you've done amazing stuff. So let me know how I can help in the future.
Oh, we'll do. We'll do. Well, stay on. Don't leave yet. We'll take you off the screen for now, but stay on. We'll bring you back just in a second. Um, hey, Victor. Wow. Another interview, and so powerful, right? I feel like Dan is such a charismatic speaker and such a thoughtful man. It brings to me the transformation that he had in his life, in his professional career, right? After 30 years of being in the institution and now serving to make sure that the institution is transforming, right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah. He continues to stay involved. You can tell that, he's passionate that he does and continues to do. I think I've seen him even go out of like the country to check out some of the different prisons out there. So yeah, just really appreciate, his curiosity as he had mentioned in the interview of just, wanting to think outside of the box to see what's possible and, approach it with enthusiasm and courage.
Yeah, and this idea of not being afraid of conflict, the understanding that conflict is part of the process and pushback is required, and it does take a lot of courage. And I just want to say that defying the odds takes courage, but it is worth it. And I think that's really powerful. Well, this brings us to the end of our current episode. Please, everybody who are listening, tune in. Once you listen, please like, comment, subscribe to our channels on YouTube and on Spotify. Check us out on LinkedIn. Check out our new website, defying the odds.com. And we're going to be in 2025 rolling out a lot of programs to help listeners build their own community of Defying the Odds community so that they can help each other defy the odds. I think that's one of our Defying the Odds goals in 2025. Roma, you got anything else? Last words?
Yeah, no, just continue to defy the odds in 2025. It's our first interview of the year. I'm looking forward to it. Really appreciate the conversations and just the people. It's been amazing. If you would have told me back in 2013 that I'd be sitting in a podcast with Dan, I tell you, you'd be crazy. But here we are. So technology can make it possible, and we're here today. So yeah, appreciate you all for tuning in, and hope to see you all the next podcast. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Defying the Odds.
We hope you found inspiration, insight, and maybe a new way of looking at the challenges in your own life.
Remember, defying the odds is a mindset, and you have what it takes to overcome anything.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe.
Until next time, keep pushing forward, stay resilient, and never stop defying the odds.